3.3%. That is where inflation landed in March, and if you think that sounds manageable, wait until you see what is hiding inside that number. Meanwhile, Vice President Vance just boarded a plane to negotiate with Iran, carrying no backup plan, no experienced diplomats, and a president who publicly said a backup plan is unnecessary. The cost of both of these stories will show up on your gas receipt, your grocery bill, and your retirement account before the month is over. I am Andrew Mitrich. This is your April 11th briefing, and we need to talk about why the numbers do not add up. If this is your first time here, this channel breaks down the biggest American stories every single day, with no fluff and no spin, just the facts and what they mean for your wallet. Hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and let us get into it. The Consumer Price Index for March jumped 0.9% in a single month. That is the biggest monthly spike in nearly 4 years. On an annual basis, inflation is now running at 3.3%, which is well above the Federal Reserve's 2% target. But the real story is the composition. Nearly 75% of that entire monthly increase came from one place: gasoline. The energy index surged 10.9%, and gas alone jumped 21.2%. This is not broad-based inflation creeping through the economy. This is a war tax disguised as a fuel price. Strip out energy and food, and core inflation actually rose just 0.2% for the month, with a yearly rate of 2.6%. That sounds almost healthy. The problem is that you cannot strip out gasoline from real life. Americans drive to work, they heat their homes, they ship their goods on trucks that burn diesel. Oil is still above $96 a barrel because the Strait of Hormuz remains partially blocked. Record domestic production has not helped. In West Virginia, electricity bills are now higher than rent for some small businesses. The promise to cut energy costs in half has collided with the reality of a war economy. Consumer sentiment tells the rest of the story. The University of Michigan index crashed to a historic low this month. Expectations about the future fell to levels not seen since May of 1980. Inflation expectations for the next 12 months jumped to 4.8%. People are not just unhappy, they are scared, and scared consumers do predictable things. They spend now before prices climb higher, they drain savings, they stop investing. Retail sales in February barely grew at all. The savings rate has been falling. The bond market agrees with the pessimists. Inflation swaps are pricing CPI above 3% for the next year. The Federal Reserve will almost certainly hold rates steady. The chance of a rate cut this year is effectively zero. Parthenon's forecast puts core PCE inflation at 3% by the end of 2026. This is not a temporary shock from a single event. It is the layering of tariffs, a government shutdown that wiped out 2 months of clean data, and now a hot war that controls 20% of the world's oil transit. Inside the MAGA coalition, something unexpected is cracking. President Trump went after Tucker Carlson, Megyn Kelly, Candace Owens, and Alex Jones this week, calling them troublemakers willing to say anything for cheap publicity. All four helped power his election campaign. All four have publicly criticized the Iran war. These are not fringe voices. They command audiences of millions. And when the people who built your media operations start questioning your biggest foreign policy decision, the fracture is not cosmetic. It is structural, because those audiences do not automatically follow the president when their favorite commentator says otherwise. The political cost of a war is always measured in two currencies, dollars and loyalty, and right now both accounts are shrinking. If gas prices stay elevated through summer and these voices keep pushing back, the midterm math changes in ways that no rally can fix. There is another price tag Americans are not seeing yet. China controls 96.7% of global refined rare earth element production. Russia adds another 2%. That is a 98% monopoly on the materials inside MRI machines, missile guidance systems, electric vehicle motors, and wind turbines. To build a competitive supply chain, the United States would need to push China's share below 40%. That means mining, refining, magnet production, workforce training, and chemical infrastructure built essentially from scratch. Simply funding magnet factories will not work when no domestic company can process the raw ore. This is not a tariff problem. It is a decade-long industrial project that has not started. And in the middle of a war that depends on precision-guided weapons and advanced electronics, the country that controls your supply of magnets has leverage that no aircraft carrier can offset. If you are finding value in this breakdown, I like help costs more than you think. It pushes this video to people who need to hear these numbers before they make financial decisions this week. If you want this every single day, subscribe. It is free and it takes 1 second. The International Monetary Fund just lowered its global growth forecast ahead of next week's spring meetings in Washington. Former Canadian Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland described the atmosphere as unprecedented uncertainty. 45 million people worldwide are now at risk of a food crisis. The logic is simple. Higher oil prices mean higher fertilizer costs, higher transportation costs, and higher food prices at every point in the chain. The IMF is preparing $42 billion in emergency assistance. But the math is brutal. When energy costs drive food costs, and food costs drive instability, and instability drives more energy disruption, you get a feedback loop that no emergency fund can fully absorb. For Americans, the connection is direct. The same barrel of oil that raised your gas bill is now raising the price of bread, eggs, and chicken through fertilizer and freight costs that have not peaked yet. And that brings us to the negotiating table. Vice President Vance landed in Islamabad today with Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, no career diplomats. The talks with Iran are happening under a 2-week ceasefire that Trump announced roughly 90 minutes before his own deadline to, in his words, destroy their civilization. Iran's position is clear. Unfreeze our assets and stop the bombing in Lebanon before we discuss anything. Israel's position is equally clear. The Hezbollah campaign is not covered by the Iran ceasefire. Former CIA and Pentagon chief Leon Panetta said he is stunned the administration was not prepared for a Hormuz closure, calling it scenario number 1 in every conflict simulation he ever ran. Former Council on Foreign Relations President Richard Haas put it bluntly, the gap between the two sides is wider than the Strait of Hormuz itself. Trump's response was that no backup plan is necessary. He said Iran's navy is gone, its air force is gone, its air defenses are gone, its leaders are eliminated. The strait, he argued, will reopen automatically because Iran cannot survive without trade revenue. Markets did not share that confidence. A morning rally faded after Trump told the New York Post he's ready to resume strikes if talks fail. Here is the problem with declaring your opponent militarily finished while simultaneously needing them to sign a deal. A country with nothing left to lose has nothing left to trade. And every day that trade stays restricted, American consumers pay the war premium at the pump, the grocery store, and eventually the ballot box. There is no clean ending to today's briefing because there is no clean resolution to any of these stories. Inflation is real and it is compounding. The negotiation has no experienced hands at the table. The rare earth gap is measured in decades, not quarters. What happens in the next 72 hours in Islamabad will determine whether 3.3% was the ceiling or just the floor. I will be here tomorrow with the answer. If this briefing helped you understand what is actually happening, hit the like button. It is the single biggest thing you can do to support independent reporting. Subscribe if you have not already, and if you want to go further, Super Thanks lets you directly fund the research behind every episode. No sponsors, no corporate owners, just me, the data, and this community. I read every comment, and your questions shape what I cover next. I will see you tomorrow.